to uplift the living standards for all the sections of society. Programs like Swachh Bharat Mission and Jal Jeevan Mission have been making a huge difference over the years. These are great examples of how a mission can enable an inclusive effort. Joined by me in this episode of Duologues is someone who has been catalyzing this effort. I welcome Ms. Vini Mahajan, Secretary of Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation, Ministry of Jal Shakti, to this episode of Duologues. So ma'am, thank you so much for having me here, and let me start by thanking you for agreeing to do this episode of Duologues. You know, the reason I'm here is that some of the work which the ministry is driving and is inspiring for a lot of people, including myself. And we'll talk about that. How they are improving the lives of people is something which we will discuss. Central to social empowerment, I believe, is sanitation and safe drinking water and the availability of safe drinking water to people. And if you look at last decade gone by, a lot of effort has gone behind, and the Swachh Bharat mission, I think, is becoming a Jan Andolan of a sort, and it has started to reflect a sense of inclusion, a sense of responsibility in people at large, that these initiatives should not necessarily be central to the effort which is essentially done by the authorities and the government itself, but a responsibility with people also. And the recently introduced Jal Jeevan mission also, I think, is inspiring a lot of people, and it is uplifting the life of people, specifically into the rural areas of the country. So let me begin by asking you a question and your reflections on these two very important missions of the government and how the journey has been since they were introduced.
Thank you, Manish. It's a pleasure to be talking to you, and thank you for setting the framework so well. As you mentioned, there are a lot of requirements that a citizen has for ease of living and generally for a good life. But water and sanitation are probably amongst the primary requirements. Now, both of these are actually state subjects, recognizing that there are a lot of local issues around how these services can best be delivered. But the country as a whole has been prioritizing these for a long time. So there were efforts to, work towards sanitation. There were efforts to work towards drinking water availability, especially for rural areas, but also for urban. Since both Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen and Jal Jeevan Mission, which I handle from this department, are centered at the rural India, that's what I'll primarily be talking about. But obviously the importance, the challenges, the issues are similar across rural and urban. So as I said, there have been decades of efforts, but eventually it seemed like an idea whose time had come in terms of providing saturation, covering all of India, all citizens, all rural areas, and covering them with a very decent basic minimum standard. So as you said, Swachh Bharat Mission Grameen, which was announced by the Prime Minister in 2014, there the effort was to make India open defecation free. Now, we do know, and of course it's not so clear to many of us living in towns and cities, but there was a lot of open defecation happening, particularly in rural areas, also in parts of urban areas. It was either because there wasn't a toilet available at home or close by, or because people did not understand the importance of defecating in a toilet. We know there are health issues, we know there are other safety concerns, especially for women, in going out to defecate. So all of that, so that became the overriding priority, and that sort of, it was taken up as a mission, time-bound effort, and the whole country sort of took that up as a challenge, as an opportunity to get people into having this facility and using the facility. So both the behavioral change aspects,
Right.
in terms of emphasizing the importance, maybe even shaming people
Yeah.
into, darwaza band karo, all of that, but making sure that availability happens.
Right.
So crores of toilets got built in a short time frame and so on. And every village was asked to check and then to state that yes, we have become open defecation free. So village after village, district after district, state after state did that. And on Mahatma Gandhi's 150th anniversary, 2nd October 2019, the country said we have become open defecation free.
Wonderful.
Of course, in all of these things, we have to recognize that there can be no hard stop,
Absolutely.
right? So new houses come up, somebody will get left out, somebody will migrate. Somebody will stop using once the pressure is off, go back to, we just like going out, it's a social thing for us. So you have to keep the messaging, you have to keep the effort going. And so it becomes a continuum. And that's why Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin Phase 2, after the ODF story of 2019 reached, this huge scale and stage, then maintaining that status, sustaining it for families which still don't have toilets, but going beyond that into solid and liquid waste management in villages.
Right.
So we know there's organic waste, there's plastic, metal, glass bottles, which all need recycling, moved out. Organic waste can be composted, used locally, used for bio CNG, biogas, all of those things. Then you have liquid waste, fecal matter, so those things. Over 60% of our villages in the entire country have today reported that they have initiated efforts and reached an ODF plus status.
Wonderful.
So while everything has not been done, but there's been a massive forward movement. And there are some states, the South somehow takes the lead in so many of these things. So from Telangana, Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, they've reported that each and every one of their villages has moved forward in the ODF plus journey. But so has J&K, so has Sikkim. So, we have this whole thing going. That's the sanitation story. And linked in some way to that is the water story, because you need water for drinking, of course. You need about 8 to 10 liters per capita daily for drinking, and that water must be good water, so that waterborne diseases, diarrheal deaths need to become history sooner rather than later. But you also need water for cooking, bathing, washing, sanitation. I mean, your toilet cannot really be functional effectively if you don't have water in the premises. The efforts to provide water in rural areas were till now to get water into areas which had serious issues. And we know there are basically two kinds of issues on water, right? Usually, traditionally, we know from early civilization, we know people settled where there was water.
True.
So, Indus Valley, the Ganga Valley, people always made settlements where there was water availability.
Right.
However, populations have gone up, there are more settlements, and water quality is now better understood. So even in the Gangetic Plain, for example, there is geogenic arsenic fluoride in a lot of places. So you actually, it's not safe to drink that water even though it's available relatively easily.
Right.
Then of course we know that there are parts of the country which are desert. Rajasthan comes top of mind, but there are parts of Bundelkhand and Madhya Pradesh, UP, cold desert in Ladakh, all kinds of regions which have our hill areas have peculiar problems. So the effort down the years was to somehow get potable water into the habitation so that people could conveniently access it.
Right.
But you still had, people women mostly, going with pots on their head or buckets in their hand to fetch water into their homes. So Jal Jeevan Mission, which was announced by the Prime Minister on 15th August 2019, was a very definitive statement that we will move towards providing a tap connection in every home, every rural home, and there would be a certain basic minimum quantity of water, so 55 liters per capita daily at least to every rural household. The water quality would meet the BIS 10,200 norms, so it would be safe both from chemical and bacteriological contamination. it would come regularly. It would not be 24/7.
Right.
But if it's going to come for 4 hours in a day, the people must know that it will come from 8 to 10 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the evening, so that they can store the water at that time. And day after day, year after year, because we know that in most parts of India, the summer months before the monsoon, water tables drop, water sources start drying up, tankers come into play. So ensuring that the water remains available, and over time, as groundwater is drawn, etc., the source again should not dry up. So reliable, sustainable, adequate, and clean drinking water.
Right.
That's Jal Jeevan Mission. When we started on 15th August 2019, there were 3.23 crore rural households which had reported these kind of tap connections in their homes. Today, we are well over 12.5 crore.
Wow.
In terms of the current number of rural households, we've done well over 64%. And there are 9 states and UTs which have reported full coverage.
Wow.
Many others are, sort of racing to get there. The good news is that there is no state in the country today which has less than 1/3 coverage, juxtaposed against the national average of about 16.5%. So even the worst performing states have sort of doubled over the national average. That's where we are. Those are the efforts going on now.
Yeah, phenomenal efforts, and lot of questions coming to my mind. But let me ask you the very fundamental one. It's safe to imagine that if the reach is limited, say a potential 3.5 crore reach to 12.5 crore, where we have already jumped in last couple of years or few years, it's safe to imagine that with limited reach, the consumption would be lower than what it would be today. The total gross consumption which would start to happen because the reach has increased, and you've also set some bare minimum targets of specific liters to be reaching every household. There is a supply chain, as it would be in any case. So the supply, I understand, is limited, and I'm not an expert, but what I understand is that on the planet itself, of the total water which is available, 2.5 odd percentage is fresh water. And when it comes to our geography, 4% of fresh water is present within our geographies, whereas percentage of population would far exceed this number. So supply itself might be a challenge. And you spoke about some of the geographical coverages, but I understand that rainfall itself, not only on the timeline is not uniform, but on the geography also is not very uniform. So supply itself might be a huge challenge. How do you look at this particular aspect? And then the other aspects might be addressing the logistics of it, creating the infrastructure, and finally, how do we ensure that the consumption and the wastages are optimized to the extent we imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got it spot on. So if we take on this ambitious effort that every single rural household must receive water in their homes and must receive a certain bare minimum quantity, which we've said should be 55 liters per capita daily. States are free to give more, and many are giving more. Somebody is giving 70, some other state is trying to give 100, depending on their availability. We have to see this against the overall availability of fresh water, which can be used for this purpose. Now, we have some snowmelt rivers, perennial rivers, rain-based. We have spring-based sources, but the larger number of rural areas and therefore households are actually serviced through groundwater. So as it's worked out now, earlier of course there was a much heavier reliance on groundwater because bringing surface water from a distance is a very expensive and difficult proposition. As you can imagine, it could be in a tribal area, forest area, needing clearances, huge pipeline networks to evacuate the energy required to pump and so on. So there was a greater reliance on groundwater earlier, but with the Jal Jeevan Mission coming in and within a short availability of resources, financial resources and other technical and other support, more and more states with problem areas in terms of water stress, either in terms of quantity or quality, are turning to surface water. Even today is that 2/3 of rural India will receive their drinking water from groundwater sources. 1/3 will get it from surface, spring, etc.
Okay.
So how do we, the big challenge is how do we make sure that the groundwater sources do not dry up?
Right.
Surface water based sources usually are not such a big deal, and the reason for that, and you know, the elephant in the room when we talk about availability of fresh water in rural areas is actually agriculture.
True.
So most of the water available is consumed by
yeah.
and for agriculture.
Right.
Drinking water actually uses only about 10% or so
Okay.
of the available water.
Right.
So the first big challenge, especially for rural India, is how do we get more crop per drop kind of thing.
Okay.
How do we make sure that our irrigation systems, how do we encourage use of drip and sprinkler systems,
Right.
how do we get better improved crop varieties
Right.
which don't use as much water, or even if to the extent feasible, diversify away from water guzzling crops, especially in areas which don't have as much water,
Right.
into crops which are less water using.
Right.
So paddy, sugarcane, etc.
Okay.
generally use a little more water, can be, encourage farmers, but then there's the whole policy story. Of course,
Right.
there's the food security question for the country.
Right.
So these are big issues.
Yeah.
But the reason why I brought this up is that actually, as a national policy,
Right.
drinking water has been declared as the overriding priority,
True.
as you can imagine.
True.
If we can just make sure that other uses of water for agriculture, for
Yeah.
industry for example, can and does play a big role.
Absolutely.
Industry does use
Right.
water. If it can use
Right.
recycled water, or if it can recycle the water it's using, so that it becomes, and there are net zero water using industries, etc., that would be great. Water is a recyclable resource.
Right.
So one of the big things that we're working on, apart from making people conscious of the issue of water availability and possible scarcity getting aggravated as more water goes into more homes, we are also working on what we call grey water management. Fecal matter is not something most of us urbanites actually talk about, but even I was talking about pit tape based toilets. Actually, if the fecal matter is just allowed to rest in a pit for a year or a year and a half, when you open that pit and put it's just khad, it's just compost. You can use your bare hands,
Right.
because it's been depathogenized by the action of the earth itself,
Right.
when it's lying at rest. So the point I was trying to make is, yes, water is a precious and
Right.
scarce commodity. Yes, we cannot afford to waste it. We have to use it judiciously. In rural India particularly, we need to work with agriculture, but also with industry, with commercial users. In urban India, there is a huge responsibility on
Absolutely.
each one of us on how much water we use or waste. But we also need to be conscious that we can reuse water, we can catch the rain.
True.
So rainwater harvesting is something which is being majorly driven.
Yes.
There's a Jal Shakti Abhiyan. We have enough water for everyone to have enough to drink and
That's good news.
use for domestic purposes, as long as we don't waste too much, and
Right.
as long as we reuse and recycle the
Right.
wastewater.
Some reflections from my side. So we have a setup called Techno Park, which is our factory setup in Jhajjar. You'll be happy to know that it's been roughly about 11 years since we've been having a washing machine factory in Jhajjar. And ma'am, this was industry first. That it's very obvious to believe that for a washing machine which utilizes water to wash clothes, the testing would happen for the leakages would happen utilizing water. But you'll be happy to know that this was an industry first, and since the time we started this factory, we have never tested washing machines using water. We developed a technology to test the leakages using air. That is
Right.
what we do over there.
Well
And
done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do tiny bit of things in our own capacity. We end up planting about 100,000 trees every year, and the water within those facilities is completely reused. We use every bit of the water. Those kind of things we do. And at the individual level, as you mentioned, I think there is more responsibility with the citizens. And I for sure know that in my own home there is a rainwater harvesting pit, but I'll cross check whether it is functional or not.
No.
I'll do that.
Well done, as a company and as an individual.
Right. Thank you so much.
Great.
And quantitatively, I understand that this is how we need to optimize the resource which is being available, both by the way of efficiently managing the entire supply chain and also at the individual and the corporate level. Qualitatively, you know, if I look at my own life when I was growing up and we used to go into fields to say play cricket, I surely remember a lot of train trips which I used to take to go to my college. It used to be a 22-hour train journey from Gwalior to Bhilai that time, and we used to hop on to railway stations and directly from the tap used to consume water. And so was the case into fields. We used to pick up any pipe which was available and consume water. I mean, what was the reason? And quite often people say that the immunity during those days used to much more better. I'm not very sure that would be the case. Or was the situation that the water then, which was directly coming into taps, was much more cleaner? I'm not very sure of that. But today, a lot of people believe that it is much more safer to consume water which is filtered. You know, so can you reflect upon this particular aspect? Has the quality changed, or what exactly is the case here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I believe, you know, like in every other real life issue, it's multiple reasons, but the main ones. Yes, I do believe that many of us who grew up drinking sort of slightly polluted water also developed immunity.
Yes.
So we didn't have the Delhi thing, which, you know, the famous stories, foreigner comes in, immediately falls sick, we drink the same water, eat the same food and don't. So that's part of the story. The other part is that there was actually a lot of waterborne disease
True.
and you know, morbidity and mortality caused by water.
Right.
So if today our lifespans have increased,
Right.
if infant mortality has come down, if average age has gone up,
Interesting.
you know, average age of death has gone up, it's
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
control on a lot of
Right.
these diseases.
Right.
And waterborne diseases is certainly one of them. So by way of example, the Nobel laureate Professor Michael Cremer, he had done a study of different countries of the world and aggregated that. And for India, he gave us a finding recently which said that Jal Jeevan Mission, once it provides clean drinking water to all households, rural households, has the potential to save 136,000 deaths, child deaths, every year. So 136,000 child deaths, child meaning below
Right.
5 years of age, can be saved, and the infant mortality rate across the world, just by providing clean drinking water, drops by as much as 25% just on this one parameter.
Wow.
So that's the impact of clean drinking water. WHO has just done a study for us giving very similar things. The lives saved, DALIs is a concept many people in the health
Right.
sector understand, and all of that, because of clean drinking water. So there is that impact. Water would obviously have been a little purer when populations were smaller, right?
Yeah.
Although, as I said, there was geogenic contamination, so fluorosis and all of those things happened in a large part, you know, in
Right.
parts of the country where people were forced to drink
Right.
fluoride loaded water and so on. So arsenic, fluoride, etc., which are in the, you know, geology, in the ground, and therefore in the groundwater, couldn't be prevented. But otherwise, bacteriological contamination would naturally have been less when populations were smaller. Larger populations means more pressure and fecal, human and animal matter entering and contaminating. So yes, it's true that earlier perhaps water was cleaner than it is today. However, there was a burden of disease then which
Yeah.
reflected in so many parameters which we are getting over today. So net, we need to be very conscious about the need for clean drinking water. The good news is that all of these new efforts, Jal Jeevan Mission or in urban areas under Amrut, water quality is a very important thing. So
Right.
one of the points constantly being hammered, we have a water quality MIS separately There's this huge network of laboratories that has been set up, so over 2,000 labs all over the water testing labs.
Right.
All over the country, and each of us is free. Every citizen can go and get their water tested
Right.
at relatively low rates. What we're trying to do is to build this understanding that the water that you drink must be of the correct quality. It is expected to be of the correct quality. Please keep checking. If it is not, you have a right to demand that the problem should be sorted out, because you're not supposed to be getting water with either bacteriological or chemical contamination, and giving this knowledge and this power in the hands of the citizen. So I can go to a lab and get my water tested, and I should. And if there's a problem, I should I should demand that this water should be safe for drinking.
So there are laboratories where people can take the sample and get the water tested.
Yes.
Okay.
Under Jal Jeevan Mission alone, over 2,000 laboratories in the country.
Okay.
Every single state capital, district level, block level, there are water testing laboratories. Information is there on our website. I would actually urge you, each one of us should reach out and get our water samples tested.
Right.
And make sure that we put enough pressure on our water utility, whether it's the municipal body or the rural public health department, whatever, to give us safe water. There's this concept of field testing kits. So under JJM, every village actually, we've been encouraging that 5 women should be trained. These are simple reagents that you use in high school chemistry with the scale, if this turns pink, then this is what it is, where the women can actually test and make sure that the water is safe. By now, over 22 lakh women in the country have been trained to do this. Every village has these FTKs.
Both quantitatively and qualitatively, you mentioned that people should have a sense of accountability and responsibility.
And empowerment.
Empowerment, of course. So I believe that the efforts which the ministry is making, a lot of empowerment has started to happen. And till the time it becomes a social movement, a Jan Andolan of a sort, and Swachh Bharat Mission, if you look at places like Indore, consistently they've been demonstrating that if people come together and if, say, constructive criticism also cuts across for the sake of inspiring other people and creating benchmarks within their localities and societies and elsewhere also, I believe the movements can take a much more faster route for this rapid change which is required. So maybe your words on encouraging people. So one which I understand, quantitatively lesser wastages should happen, conscious utilization, as much as possible resource creation like rainwater harvesting, reuse for industrial purposes and so on and so forth, and qualitatively getting the water tested as frequently as one can, specifically when there is a state of doubt. Those kind of should be done. Anything else coming to your mind where people can have higher participation, both in optimizing the usage and ensuring that the quality of water consistently remains what it is, and we do not end up duplicating the effort to purify and filter the water?
So Jan Bhagidari, absolutely. If these end up becoming government priorities and government initiatives and efforts, people and communities tend to sit back and wait for someone to come and sort out their problem. That's not happening when we are talking about 6 lakh villages, 19 crore houses. Supposing in a remote village there's a leakage. Now we know that a leakage in a water supply line is the most important cause of contamination. Contamination happens at leakage point, and you can lose all the benefit of water treatment plant and clean water if at that end there is bacteriological contamination. So people have to feel that this is ours, for us, and we can take charge. And therefore this whole effort under JJM, for example, we are working on skilling people in every village. There should be somebody who is skilled in basic, plumbing, masonry, electrical work, so that if the motor sort of,
they're able to repair it.
Then it needs a repair. We should be able to do it locally. If there's a small leakage, you should be able to repair locally something, not wait for somebody to come from the nearest city to do it. And therefore, architecturally, institutionally, the effort to make sure that every village becomes empowered. when the water supply scheme is completed, we are encouraging states that you hand these over to the Gram Panchayat, and through the Gram Panchayat to the village community to operate and maintain. It must be theirs.
Right.
We've seen that women are the main custodians both for water and sanitation, right? So the WHO study I was talking about earlier has also said that the availability of clean water through household connections under Jal Jeevan Mission will end up saving every single day 5.5 crore man hours.
Wow.
And they're mostly woman hours.
Amazing.
So 75% of that is women's time. 5.5 crore hours every single day spent on getting water from the nearest source.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of impact it has on lives, the health impact, the safety and dignity, all of that. And therefore, we want that women should be given a larger role in leading this effort. And we've seen that wherever, for example, there's this huge concept of self-help groups.
True.
And over the years, women's self-help groups have developed. We are saying, let them take charge over O&M. And we find that all over the country, there are user charges being applied and collected.
Right.
So ranging from 30 rupees per household per month to, even going up to 150 rupees per household per month. People themselves are collecting this money, keeping it for carrying out day-to-day repairs and maintenance, buying the chlorine for chlorination, hiring a pump operator, all of that.
Right.
Therefore, this thing about engaging the people, empowering them, of course they have to be supported.
Right.
So there has to be a whole system by which they understand what to do, how to deal with issues. Online systems for water quality, uploading that information. If there's a problem, the resolution of the problem should be reported online, all of that.
Right.
In sanitation, the onus is even more in some ways, because we know that segregation of waste at the household level is critical to the proper disposal of waste.
Right.
So if every household can start separating out its wet waste, which is from the kitchen, food waste, skin of some vegetables, etc., versus the plastic, glass, metal kind of non-biodegradable waste, it greatly helps our urban local bodies and even in the rural areas, the rural institutions, to safely manage both, because these wastes are managed differently. Organic waste can be composted, becomes usable in the fields, kitchen garden, etc. We can even do household level composting, and many households are very responsibly doing that, and RWAs are doing that, and so on. So can we start segregating our own waste, ensuring that our organic waste, you're talking about the responsibility of the individual. I think if we just recognize these issues as being issues important for us as individuals, for our community, for our society, and take the ownership to whatever extent we can make a huge difference.
Yeah, every individual is very integral to this whole planet. May sound philosophical, but whatever happens to the planet starts to happen with us. In that sense, we are very clearly directly linked.
Absolutely.
So it's an individual responsibility for sure. Ma'am, moving the topic a bit, I mean, you've been an officer into variety of government roles for a while. I can safely say that you have been handling multiple responsibilities into different domains for last many decades. So can you reflect upon your own journey? What were the high points and what were the responsibilities which you led in the past? Any learnings coming out of those?
Yeah, many decades, truly. I joined the IS in 1987 in the Punjab cadre. And typically for IS officers, we spend the first few years in the field.
Right.
So from being, handling a subdivision and going up, the challenges of working on issues which are really grassroots kind of issues. So you posted in a small subdivision in Punjab, you're dealing with the entire gamut of issues which a citizen faces from the government. In a way, you're accountable for whole of government kind of problems. So people will come with municipal issues, there's this insect at my water bottle, ranging to my road is not working, to my school. The challenge and the privilege at a young age.
Yeah.
I mean, I became collector, I wasn't yet 30. So having the responsibility for your whole district, looking at the issues, prioritizing what do you want to put your energies in. When I became collector, there was this whole thing there's a big thing about literacy.
Right.
And adult literacy through the Total Literacy campaign. So I thought that was a good thing to do, and Government of India was pushing it. The state had not really started too much, but there was some lighthouse. So I just plunged into it from day one, and we just pushed that in the entire district, Roopnagar, that was my district. We must make every single adult who's illiterate firstly identify, then have this whole army of through master training and all volunteers who would teach groups of 10 people at a time, and everyone must have the opportunity to become literate.
True.
Such a pleasure when my district was later adjudged as one of the top ones in the country. The then Prime Minister Vajpayee awarded us. So lots of good stuff.
Right.
And I think in the field, in the secretariat, in the state headquarters working, I was a finance economics kind of person. Had the opportunity to work in infrastructure, in finance and so on. Much later, the opportunity to work in the health sector, something which I didn't understand, but I'm happy to say that a lot of leading medical doctors actually started calling me Dr. Vini because of the understanding one gets to develop, working with experts over a longer period. The opportunity to serve in Government of India in the Department of Economic Affairs briefly, but later on in the Prime Minister's office with Dr. Manmohan Singh. Through the meltdown years, I was handling the economic sector and the whole response to the global financial meltdown. I think tremendous opportunities.
Absolutely.
The opportunity to serve my own state as its chief secretary, including through the COVID period, the whole COVID response, and now here looking after this very niche area.
Yeah, very important.
But
Ma'am, taking a step back, like when you were growing up, were you wanting to take up administrative services as a career choice? How did this happen? Did somebody inspire you, or when you were growing up, you were wanting to take this as a career choice?
Yeah, I think later I had learned at IIM Calcutta that this is probably foreclosure. So I had already kind of made up my mind. My father was an IAS officer in the Punjab Cadre.
Okay.
I greatly appreciated the kind of work he was doing. We were a close family. We had two sisters, and I decided that's what I wanted to do. So although I wrote AIMS and IIT and got into both, that was a time when I really understood that I actually definitely only want to do the civil services. So that was the journey. Never for a minute have I regretted it.
Wow. This brings me to my last question to you, quite in line with what you just mentioned. What is that very higher purpose which wakes you up every morning to do what you do?
For now, as long as I am in public service directly, and I will be retiring next year, but until then, it's the opportunity to work in so many different spaces, but each one of them so important. So whether you're industry secretary, and I've been all of those, the challenges, the opportunities, huge. The support that you get, phenomenal. There's so much expert knowledge out there that you can draw upon. There's so much difference you can make, small incremental changes can be meaningful.
Absolutely.
I believe each one of us can do that, but like I said, I've been really lucky in having, so what wakes me up at night would still be the work that I'm doing currently.
Absolutely.
And how it's moving and what can do better. Once I retire, I will think of a different role for myself,
Right.
and I hope that will also keep me awake at night, because
Absolutely.
I think you have to be deeply engaged in whatever you're doing, so that that has to be your inspiration.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The conversation was very inspiring to me personally. I'm sure this is going to be insightful and inspirational to a lot of people. I wish you more power to the entire staff at the missions, the Jal Jeevan mission and Swachh Bharat mission. This is phenomenal effort by the government, and every individual would have contributed their bit, starting from the ministry to the people who are involved down till the front line. I wish everybody the very best, and our huge respects for the kind of effort which is going in. And as I said, that we will do our tiny bit in our own capacities to make whatever difference we can in the time to come. So thank you very much for the conversation. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Manish. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you, ma'am.